Hello and welcome to, oh man, I'm doing this a lot. It's always hello and welcome to. So let's just go with hello. This discussion, we're going to look at international marketing, and we're going to take a very broad approach towards what is meant by international marketing. I teach a multinational marketing course, MK361, here in the Bowler School, and you know, one of the things that you can learn in that class is that, or maybe not, because I kind of take the same approach in that class that I do in this lecture, is that there are different terms that are used in association with international marketing, such as multinational marketing and global marketing. And there are some there are some people who would argue that the three of those are not synonymous terms. That is, that international marketing means one thing, multinational marketing means something else, and global marketing means something different than either international marketing or multinational marketing. We're going to take a very broad approach. We're going to, whether we call it global, multinational, or international marketing, we're just talking about companies that market their products in multiple countries. All right. So, for example, if you've ever traveled outside the United States and you've gone to a McDonald's or a Subway or a Burger King or a Starbucks, that's international marketing. That would be considered international marketing. Another example would be if you have an iPhone. That iPhone was not manufactured in the United States. You may have bought it in the United States, but it was not manufactured in the United States. That would be an example of international marketing as well. And there are many other examples of international marketing that we could give. Um, in this discussion, we're going to focus on two topics. The first topic we're going to talk about is the marketing macro environment. You say, well, we talked about the marketing macro environment back in the overview lecture, and you are absolutely right. But what we're going to look at the marketing macro environment this time is we're going to look at it from an international perspective, right? So we're going to look at the PEST model, the PEST acronym again, political, economic, social, and technological. We're going to look at that, and we're going to, again, we're going to focus on it from an international perspective. The second major topic we're going to look at is we're going to look at the marketing mix, the four Ps, with a specific example based on one of the things that we're going to talk about when we talk about the marketing macro environment or the PEST framework. And before we get started, I pointed this out in the overview lecture. We live now, in June, July 2017, very uncertain time in the world politically, and that has economic ramifications and ultimately potential ramifications for international trade, hence, or international marketing. And so, we had talked about the election of President Trump. We had talked about the Brexit issue. We have talked about in some countries the rise of the nationalist politicians. And a lot of these things are about kind of countries pulling back their engagement in the international political and or economic community. Now, I'm a firm believer in the fact that international trade isn't going away anytime soon. There may be, constraints that are attempted to be put on the international trade, but it's not going anywhere. I just think that the international trade snowball is so big that it's going to be really hard to kind of shrink the international trade snowball to the size it was when I was a little kid, back in the 1950s, when there was minimal international trade between countries. To give you an example, in today's world, approximately 25% of the world's gross domestic product comes from international trade. And so, man, if you think about that, that is a really large percentage. And if you start to think about, the products that you personally have or use, and start to think about how many of them have some sort of international component to them, right? Whether it's your cell phone or perhaps a book bag that you have, right? A lot of those might be made in Vietnam or China or Cambodia or places like that. Um, if you have a Nokia, that's a Finnish company. If you drive a Hyundai, that's Korean, South Korean. So you look at where your clothes are manufactured. So there's just, this, like I say, to me, it's not going away anytime. It's not going away anytime soon. Now, to be fair, because of both political and economic things that have been going on in the world over the past 5 to 10 years, the projections of growth in international trade have been trimmed. And so, for 2017 and 2018, the estimates are that world trade will grow between 1.5 and 4% in 2017 as well as 2018. So again, not going away, but if you were to go back to the mid to the late 1990s and in through part of up to basically when the Great Recession occurred in 2007, you would see much higher annual growth rates for international trade, maybe 5 to 7%, depending on the particular year. Okay, so let's look at PEST, the marketing macro environment, in terms of the four PEST factors. And the first one we'll start with is political. But before starting with political, I got to point out to you that we're gonna talk about each one of these factors individually, but you got to recognize that there's interface or interactions and influences between the various factors. So, for example, if you look at kind of what's going on with respect to some countries' approach to international trade these days, it's both a political as well as an economic issue. And so for example, a lot of the anxiety in the United Kingdom with the Brexit vote was that there was a lot of people weren't real comfortable with kind of the politics or the political situation where, Britain, the United Kingdom had to do a lot of things that it necessarily didn't want to do as a country, but had to do it because it was a member of the European Union. And then the economic considerations are that there was trade was facilitated between the various countries in the economic union because of their membership in the economic union. And so one of the things that's like really up in the air right now, and it's like you wait 2 weeks, you see an article that might contradict an article that you read 2 weeks ago, is there's really not a lot of consensus and a lot of angst, quite honestly, about what's going to happen in the United Kingdom because of their exit from the United Kingdom. What's going to happen in terms of trade between the United Kingdom and Germany, France, and Spain, and many other EU members that the United Kingdom has traded with for a long time. Are tariffs going to be imposed? Are documentation requirements going to be increased? And right now, that's we don't know any of that because the negotiations for the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union haven't begun. The UK is the first country to ever withdrawn from the European Union, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens as part of the process. So, politically, as we pointed out, one of the big issues politically, and it also has economic implications, is the idea of trade alliances. And these trade alliances, as I alluded to, what the trade alliances tend to do is they tend to reduce the barriers to trade between countries. And so that's both a political and an economic kind of consideration. And so the reduction in trade barriers comes about because in many cases tariffs, again, taxes on imported goods, tariffs are a political thing, but they clearly have economic implications, right? Tariffs or taxes on imported goods are reduced tremendously, if not eliminated completely. There's also much lower documentation requirements with countries that are members of trade alliances. And again, if you have an understanding of the documentation stuff, is it's not only that you need to have the correct documentation, but the documentation has to be accurate as well as up to date. So if you, for example, if you have a passport, your passport is good for 10 years. Some countries won't let you enter if your passport is 6 months or less from expiration. Here's a quick aside: if you don't have a passport, get one. The world that you're going to be working and living in, the more you can learn about other countries, and as part of your jobs, you may be sent to do business in other countries that you might have never imagined visiting when you were, let's say, 5 or 6 years old. The earlier you get exposed to like to other countries and how they do things and language and things like that, the better off you're going to be. And so, when we talk about things like these trade alliances, they have both lower tariffs as well as reduced documentation requirements, and that helps because if nothing else, with reduced documentation requirements, your costs are going to be lower. Where there's clearly an economic issue there as well. All right, so we've talked a little bit about political. With respect to economics, there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about with respect to economic. Starting point oftentimes is the concept of gross domestic product, right, or GDP, the value of goods and services produced in an economy in a particular period of time. And if I were to ask you a question, what country has the largest GDP in the world? What would your answer be? And you say, well, we can't answer. We're watching this screwy video. We're not doing this interactive, big boy. And the answer is the People's Republic of China, or China, is now the country with the world's largest GDP, and this has occurred much more rapidly than any of the experts predicted even 10 years ago. When I would talk about this concept of international trade and gross domestic product and, which country has the world's largest gross domestic product, I would mention that, well, maybe by the year 2030 or 2040, China is projected to have a larger gross domestic product than the United States. Well, look at the calendar, it says 2017. And within the past 2 years, China has gone from like third to first. Now, to be fair, right? You sit there and you say, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." Well, good for China. It has the largest largest GDP of any country in the world. But excuse me, doesn't China have a lot of people? And you would be absolutely correct. Pardon me while I take a little bit. This is Diet Coke. A little bit of libation, thanks. And so there's another economic concept called gross domestic product per capita. Quite simply, and if you're an economics major, forgive me because I'm oversimplifying this tremendously. But gross domestic product per capita is you basically take the gross domestic product of your country divided by the number of people, and voila, you've got gross domestic product per capita. And so, gross domestic product in and of itself is an important economic statistic, but gross domestic product per capita, right? Well, that gives you a whole different series of information because, maybe you find out that the gross domestic product per capita in a country is $120,000. Well, now if I'm a marketer, that's extremely helpful because now I know that if I have luxury goods, right, or expensive products, if the gross domestic product per capita is $120,000, I might have a ready market for my products. The flip side of that coin is something called the bottom of the pyramid. All right, and the bottom of the pyramid refers to And there's different definitions of bottom of the pyramid. But basically, bottom of the pyramid is this concept that people live on either $2 a day or $4 a day. Think about that. They live on $2 a day or $4 a day. And so if you're a marketer, having an understanding of whether I'm dealing with a bottom of the pyramid country, right, a country where people are really poor, or I'm dealing with one that's really wealthy, a GDP per capita of $120,000, that can have important implications for marketers. And again, what we're going to do when we talk about the marketing mix is we're going to look at BOP, bottom of the pyramid, in terms of the 4 Ps of the marketing mix. All right, so we've talked about political, we've talked about economic. We can now talk about social. And so one of the considerations with social component of the PEST framework is that I like to talk about is something called the self-reference criteria, or SRC. And the self-reference criteria, or SRC, is an unconscious reference to the experiences, culture, knowledge, and how we use them as a basis for decision making. And it's not wrong. Right, the self-reference criteria is not wrong. You say, can you repeat that? I said, absolutely. Right, an unconscious reference to experiences, culture, knowledge, and how we use them as a basis for decision making. Our SRCs aren't wrong, but they can have tremendous influence on how we perceive things, and maybe if we don't have an understanding of kind of some of the stuff that we see in other countries. We may make really bad business/marketing decisions. So let me give you a brief example. So a number of years ago, there's basically the late 2004. I ended up teaching at Peking University in China, and every morning I went to breakfast in like a cafeteria, and first of all they have very different things to eat for breakfast. In China, you'd see a lot of vegetables, see a lot of soups. Wouldn't see any cereal necessarily. Not going to see pancakes. And every morning, you say soup? Yeah, absolutely soup. Every morning when I'd go there'd be these group of people, right, both males and females, and they would be eating their soup, and they'd be doing this, right? They'd be slurping their soup, and slurping their soup really loudly, right? Now, if I'd have done that at the dinner table when I was growing up, my mom would have smacked me into the middle of the next decade, okay? But in many countries, to include China, slurping your soup signifies that you're really enjoying your food. So again, the self-reference criteria comes in is like, well, slurping your food is bad because mom will beat the crap out of you because you're slurping your food. And yet in reality, in many countries, that's a way that you show appreciation. So having an understanding of the social environment and seeing things and things that may make absolutely no sense to you, or just assuming that, well, because it's the way we do things in my country is the way that everybody else does it, it can get marketers into a lot of trouble, a ton of trouble. And so the last of the PEST components involves technology. And we'll briefly talk about technology. And one of the things that I'll just talk about is the internet. We live in North America, right? The internet is ubiquitous, pretty much. That's not the case around the world. So just to give you an example, there's a website that I use in my multinational marketing class, and one of the things it does is it basically 4 times a year, quarterly, but it updates world internet usage. All right, and so just to give you an idea, right? I took North America as a continent and compared it to Africa. The internet usage rate in North America, and this might surprise you, is approximately 88%. So basically 88% of the North American population uses the internet. 28% of people in Africa use the internet. And so again, if you think from a self-reference criterion perspective, and you go, well, let's do some, let's do some social media stuff. Let's make heavy use of technology in what we're doing. If the people don't have access to the internet, you're going to have a potential problem. All right, you say, okay, gotcha, big boy. Oh, I'm getting close to the 20-minute mark. So briefly, to conclude this video, which obviously will go more than 20 minutes, ooh, Paul, you talk too much. We'll look at the 4 Ps, the marketing mix, in terms of the bottom of the pyramid perspective. And I'll give a personal example. In 2009, January 2009, I went with a group of John Carroll students and a couple of John Carroll staff. Went with them on an immersion trip to Nicaragua, down in Latin America. And Nicaragua was a pretty poor country, not the greatest GDP per capita. And there's a lot of good examples that I was able to learn down in Nicaragua in terms of how the marketing mix might be applied to the to people at the bottom of the pyramid. So if we look at, for example, product, price becomes important. If you're living on $2 to $4 a day, price becomes really important for the product that you're selling. So marketers have to say, geez, what can we do to to help make this product affordable? And what they often do is they will reduce either the size or the quantity of a particular product. So, for example, and I apologize for the example, but it's an example that I saw with my own 2 eyes. Right, I was visiting a house that was 2 doors down from the people that I was staying at within Nicaragua, visiting a house, and this house was basically running a mini convenience store out of their living room. And so one of the people who lived in the neighborhood a lady came up and she bought 1 tampon. Right, now think about it. If you're female, you don't generally buy 1 tampon, right? You buy a box of tampons. Why did this lady buy 1 tampon? It was all she could afford. Okay, and so again, you've got the price consideration, you've got the product consideration, and in fact, there's a term, sachet, SACHET, that refers to a single use or single serving product, and marketers often use sachets when marketing to bottom of the pyramid situations, right? You don't have as much of the product, right? The quantity is smaller, the size is smaller, etc. So we've talked about product, we talked about price. Place, I just gave you the convenience store, right? The convenience store it was just like somebody's living room, right? And so, the way products are distributed, very, very different in bottom of the pyramid countries, right? You're often dealing with smaller quantities, right, that are being placed. You can have like little stands all over the place, right? Little shops all over the place, right? And then in terms of promotion, obviously, you're living on $2, $4 a day. You probably don't have a great deal of, let's say, access to, internet or things of that nature. So, taking a little longer than I wanted to on this, but hopefully you've gotten a little bit of an overview of international marketing, and I will see you for the next topic, which will be marketing research. Bye.